My name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who helped shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't have sponsors for this project, but if we did, today's interview, the first of two interviews that I did with Niles Wallace, this interview would be brought to you by Alfred University. A private university in Western New York, Alfred helps you shape your own path through hands-on learning, close mentorship, and opportunities that test and strengthen your skills. Here at Alfred, you can try, refine, and advance without being limited by a set track. Go beyond expected. Now again, this interview with Niles Wallace, the first of two, was recorded on January 10th, 2025. Enjoy the interview. All right, well, we'll just get started. So the first question I usually ask is, what's your earliest memory of art from your childhood?
Oh, wow. I don't know exactly what the earliest memory would be. I mean, I have some really, really early memories, which I think are sort of unusual for people to have. I can remember things that I can trace back in my life to when I was, I must have about 1 year old. I mean, I couldn't have been much older than that. I can remember when my father still lived with us, and I think he left us before I was 2, so I know I can date it that way. But in terms of a creative thing or process, probably second or third grade, I remember having sort of nice experiences. I remember handing a drawing in for something, and the teacher seemed really impressed that I knew about perspective, which I didn't. But but I was showing it. It was visible in the drawing that there was a way of things diminishing as they went away from me, and she seemed to think that was a neat thing. But that was probably the earliest thing that I actually could remember as being art related. I had an uncle who was sort of a hobbyist painter, and I don't know that had any impact on me, but it's funny because I still have one of his little tiny, 3x5 paintings, landscape paintings that he did. And he had been I think just a kind of a person who liked to keep busy and liked to make things. And so, and he was a fun person to be around. But
now, what about in the house? Were there art objects in the house?
Oh, hell no.
No, why hell no? Where were you when you were growing up?
I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I mean, I was born, when I was born, my parents lived in a small town called Knox. It's Knox, Pennsylvania, very tiny town. My parents owned a little roadside diner, and I still have memories of that too. Which is kind of weird. It was like the whole area. It was Western Pennsylvania. Hell, I mean, it's like nowhere, nothing. After my father left, we moved in with my grandparents, and so I was raised in my grandparents' home. We lived in, after we moved out of Knox, we moved to Slippery Rock, which people think is kind of a joke, but that's the real name of the town, and there's a state university there. And we lived right across from the campus. And it was a real, meat and potatoes, working man environment. My grandfather was a barber. He was a bad barber. lousy haircuts. And I had to endure those lousy haircuts all the way through high school. It was embarrassing. It was horrible. And he was a real sort of grouchy person. But my grandmother was a real sweetheart. And so my sister and I and my mother lived with them. And my grandfather was a staunch union man. He was involved in the Barbers Union and would go to their convention every year. And so it was very democratic, oriented politically, pro-labor, pro-working man. The only art that I would ever remember of having seen probably would have been stuff that my uncle did, but I don't really even remember seeing much of that. My grandmother had collect knickknacks, there was stuff like that around the house all the time. Otherwise, no, art was not even on the table.
No, I mean, sometimes when I say art, obviously my brain goes immediately to paintings because I'm a painter. But what about, because a lot of the people that I've talked with, craft, needlework, handmade objects, pottery were a part of the mix. And then some people, album covers was sort of their entryway into the land of visual art or visual thinking. What about in terms of thinking about the house itself? Were there any needlework, any crafting?
It was more of a matter of people working with their hands, making stuff.
Right.
My grandmother was a seamstress. She stayed at home, took care of the family, and cooked. But she sewed for people as a way of making extra money. Because, like I said, my grandfather was a bad barber, and so he didn't make much money. It was whatever. But my grandmother was always sewing. So the kitchen table was always covered with patterns laid out. And she would sew for people that were generally they were big people that couldn't just buy clothing off the rack that easily. So they would, tell her what she wanted, or they would bring in patterns and material, and then she would cut them out and assemble them for us. So I was always aware of that. And my grandfather did, since he didn't have many customers, he would he liked to make things, generally things out of wood, and so he had a little wood shop set up out in the garage, and it wasn't anything that came out of any creative impulse. It was probably something where he saw a plan in, like Popular Mechanics or something like that, and then he would make it with the goal of trying to sell it and make extra money. So that was the thing. There was always somebody making things like that. And then my mother had a regular job. She was a secretary. And, that was, so it was more of people just working with their hands.
Well, one of the reasons I ask is, we can get those influences in a million different ways.
Oh, yeah.
And then also, maybe just to back up a little bit, what I know about Western Pennsylvania doesn't even fit in a thimble. It's like nothing. And so will you give me a little bit of background information on Western Pennsylvania? And so, when I was like, is there art in the house? And you were like, oh, my God, Hamlet, no. How come?
Western Pennsylvania, in my experience, we lived about 30 miles north of Pittsburgh. So steel manufacturing, blue collar, transportation, coal mining, and heavy, as I said, union presence, steel workers, coal miners, all that stuff. Pretty hardcore, blue collar environment. Pretty rural, because even at that time, I think once you got outside of Pittsburgh, there was just kind of scrabble farmland and manufacturing. So the small town that we lived in, Butler, had two major employers. One was Armico Steel, and the other one was Pullman Standard that made the railroad cars. And that's pretty much where everybody worked. And there was, that was it. It was a small town, about 30,000. Everybody went to the same high school. There's only one high school in town. And it was pretty, actually, come to think of it, it was kind of remarkable. I graduated from a class in high school, and so we jumped forward to high school. There were about 900 people in my graduating class, and out of that group, one of them became the CEO of a major Memorex, the recording, he came up with Is It Live or Is It Memorex theme. That was his. I had another classmate that worked in the United Nations, two guys that went to the Super Bowl, big football area. And it was just remarkable that there were a lot of people that were so successful. Oh, another guy who was like the road manager for Alice Cooper, he was a close friend in high school. I mean, it was a small, nothing town.
Okay, so thinking about that, how, when you were a kid, when you were talking about being around your uncle who was making the paintings, and you were talking about how they were kind of fun to be around, and so would you go and see their studio, or was it? Were they nearby, or?
Oh, he lived close by.
Okay.
But I don't know that he ever had a studio.
Okay.
And I don't want to make too big a thing about seeing his paintings because I didn't see him every day.
Right.
And he was just a hobbyist. He did landscapes, little landscape paintings, and probably a lot of plein air stuff, where he'd just go out and do his little thing. He was a salesman, and this was his hobby. And that would have been the only person that I had contact with that had any, real sense that he was making art.
Right. Now, what about in school? You were talking about that teacher that saw one of your drawings and had perspective that felt good. What about in school? Was art a thing that was supported?
No. Well, in elementary school, it was probably like most people at that time.
Yeah.
You had art maybe once a week, and we were probably fortunate enough to have an actual art teacher who would come around. She traveled around, and she would come in. We'd have one art class a week, something like that. We might use art in other projects, just pretty much like a lot of people do. But that would have been the only formal thing. Now, junior high school, probably about the same. But in high school, it became an elective. And since I like to make stuff, I like to draw. I was not very good at it, but I like to draw. And horses, I like to draw horses. I learned how to draw horses.
No, wait, how did you learn how to draw horses?
Just by looking at comic books.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
So now you open up another can of worms.
There I did.
I know. So you were looking at comic books just out of curiosity. What were you looking at?
First memory, and here we go back to first memories. As I said before, when I was born, we lived in a small town called Knox. My parents had a diner. Right next door to the diner was a hardware store, and it was owned by a man named Ron Dascom, and his wife was Mary. And often when my parents were working in the restaurant, they would watch me at the hardware store, and I would sit on a can of paint, and I would look at comic books, because I couldn't read, but I would look at Sergeant Rock, G.I. Joe stuff, pretty much any comic books, and I would look at the pictures. So that visual, nonverbal communication, because I couldn't read, that was kind of a neat thing. I do remember that. The only other thing I remember about that hardware store was that Ron had some kind of stuffed animal that he would chase me around with. if I did something that I wasn't supposed to be doing, it would just scare the crap out of me that he would chase me with this thing. But those are the only real memories I have of that, which is pretty funny.
And you were talking about sort of teaching yourself how to draw this horse.
Yeah.
Now, was it just like one of those things where you would just draw on the notebook paper, or was it something where your mom would be like, you need a sketchbook?
No.
Okay.
No, it was just paper.
So you were just kind of drawing on your own.
Yeah, just drawing on my own. I mean, there must have been some sort of crayons or something there, and I would draw those sorts of things.
Right. And I remember you said that you have a sibling.
A sister.
A sister. Into art at all? Remotely? No, not at all.
No, not at all. She was 4 years older than me, and no, not any art there either. I was the only one.
Okay, so then you decided to take it in high school as an elective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, talk to me a little bit about that experience in terms of your high school. What kind of kid were you in high school?
Oh, I was pretty straight arrow, not cause any trouble kid. Part of that was being raised by a single mother. You didn't want to make any more trouble. Yeah, I was pretty normal.
Like, were you playing sports? Were you a cool kid?
I was a baseball player.
Okay.
Yeah, I did like baseball.
And you played baseball
constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably would have wanted to be a baseball player before I would have wanted to be anything else at that time for years. Yeah, I was pretty focused on playing baseball, just from sandlot stuff out back, throwing a tennis ball against the wall and catching it for hours on end, that sort of stuff.
And it sounds like this school was massive.
It was a big school.
With 900 in a graduating class, that's unbelievable.
Well, it was the only high school in the whole city.
Right.
So, city of 30,000.
Right.
Yeah, there's about 3,000 probably in the high school.
Wow. Okay.
Big school.
Well, now talk to me about this high school art class.
I mean, it was fine. I didn't really know. I can't think of anything outstanding that we did in particular. I remember the teachers. I did have one teacher who at least was interested in me enough to think that I had potential. Mm. When it came time to graduate, I just assumed I would go to college, which was pretty radical assumption considering that we had no money. It was like my grandmother, my mother was, a secretary, and my grandparents weren't making any money. So I don't know how we were going to do that. But my sister had gone to college, and I assumed that I would. I felt like I had to declare some major, but I didn't know what it was going to be. So I decided that I was going to be an art education major, and I'd probably be an art teacher. As a default, actually, because I don't think I had anything else. And it just seemed so disingenuous to sort of suggest that I would just be not declare a major. Mm-hmm. Felt like I had to do something. Mm-hmm. So that was basically what I did. And so the art teacher actually was interested enough that he drove me and actually a couple other students up to Edinboro State University. It was Edinboro State College at that time in Pennsylvania for our interview, because we had to be interviewed, which was kind of neat. Interview was absolutely nothing. I could have just stood there and looked at them and not answered, and they probably would have still accepted me. But I didn't know that at the time. But he took us up for an interview and got into school at Edinboro. And Edinboro was nice. Edinboro was a good school. I think I lucked into it at that time. It was the 60s. So any kind of radical or alternative lines of thinking were becoming more prevalent or popular. And Edinboro was very conducive to that sort of thing. They had a really good small art department. So that was a lucky thing on my part.
Now, you were talking about the timestamp in terms of where we are in the history. So you were saying the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
What else was happening in the world at that time that was an influence? Because, I mean, that's a huge part of our history.
Oh, yeah.
What was going on then when you made that transition from high school to college?
It was a crazy time. I mean, because we were transitioning from like post-Korean War society. A lot of people went to school in the GI Bill, came back, they were raising families. They wanted their families to have, their kids to have things that they didn't have, which meant going to college and doing all these things. And so there was this big shift, I think, where you didn't necessarily have to just get out of school and go to work in the steel mill or you know, the Pullman Standard Company. You could actually go to college and get a professional sort of degree. But also, people had time. You know, kids had time. They didn't have the same kind of demands on them to be productive in terms of like bringing income back to the family. They had leisure time. They could question lots of things. Question authority. Question the way things were. And so they became kind of rebellious. At the end of the 50s and the 60s, I think there was a certain rebellious period. You know, James Dean in the 50s, and then you got into the 1960s, and you had the loosening of kind of traditional thinking or morals, and you kind of progressed from beat. You know, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac in literature, lifestyles, into the drug-oriented lifestyles, music groups, the Beatles, Rolling Stones. They sort of all started to emerge. Drugs became more common and actually influential. I mean, all these. This was a big upheaval. You know, it was a lot of change that was going on in society, and of course, the Vietnam War then happened, and that was like a major pressure.
And this was when you were in school, in college.
Yeah. Oh well, this was. I think it's. Let's see. 66 is when I graduated. The Vietnam War, would have started right around that, or our involvement in it would have started around that time. And actually, college was kind of a way to get out of it for some people. Actually, I think it was my senior year in college. I became eligible for the draft because I was a credit short. And so suddenly, I don't know how they figured that out, but my draft board, contacted me and said, you have to report for a physical, which kind of freaked me out. So it was like always in the background. The Vietnam War was in the background in college, yes.
Yeah. Now, when you were in school, you went there sort of thinking about art history, as art education,
Mm-hmm.
as a way of, this is going to be your path. Talk to me a little bit about, because it also sounds like the shift from going to high school in the small town to going to Edinboro. Was Edinboro a large school?
No, actually... it was smaller than my high school. at that time. No, it was just a small state college, and I think Pennsylvania, like a lot of school systems, state-operated school systems, would place their schools in small towns. I don't know whether that was what the thinking behind that was, whether it was a way to keep the kids out of trouble. Like what trouble could you get into in a small town, which we managed to do anyway. But they were generally all in small, underpopulated areas, and so it was a small town, about 30 miles or 40 miles south of Erie, Pennsylvania, off of Lake Erie, and just in farm country. And it just so happened that they had a great art department.
So what kind of classes were you taking?
Virtually everything that we took was you were on a path. We didn't have very many electives at all. I think if you went according to a schedule. You took these classes first semester, these classes second semester, and so on. And you didn't really get into being able to choose what class you were going to take as an elective until probably your junior year. So the first 2 years were sort of mandated. And if you failed something, then you had to get that class. You had to make that up either by going the summer or repeating it the next semester, but you were sort of then behind. And but then we would get an elective in junior year. Ceramics was one of the required courses. I think I took that beginning of my sophomore year. But design, drawing, printmaking, I think jewelry making, and ceramics, sculpture. We didn't have photography at that point, but those were the major courses. And then we would have to take an art history. And again, that was our art history 1, art history 2, it was like that. And they did it generally consecutively. So it was pretty much standardized. But the goal wasn't necessarily to be an artist, it was to be an art teacher. So I had to take art education classes too.
Now, I know a lot of times when people make that transition from high school to college, there's like a thing where Pandora's box is sort of opened, and they start to see stuff that they'd never seen before, or work with materials that they had never worked with before. I'm curious about that freshman year, that transition for you from high school into college, and what do you think it was about that? Because, sometimes we make the decision to be something, and then in the first semester we realize this is totally not it. And so I wonder what it was about that time early in college that made it feel like that was the right fit.
I don't know. It was a big change. I mean, we were on our own. Had to live in a dormitory, so there was that. I'd never had roommates before. I'd never lived in that sort of environment. But we were on our own. I wasn't living at home, under those warm embrace of and control. So yeah, it was a big life change, which I think everybody goes home. I think everybody should get away from home early and experience life. But that's just me. There were, it was new. It was making new friends, being exposed to different things. I'd never had. I actually never had adult friends, which I made in college. I mean, I actually could be friends with some of my teachers, which was pretty unusual for me. Up until that time, you only had your peers. Nobody had grown-up friends. being away from home. I can remember going to parties and there'd be strobe lights, for God's sakes, you know. Wow, never saw that before. And yeah, you'd get alternative viewpoints on things, which was pretty interesting to me.
Now, was that something that you've been exposed to before? I mean, you were talking about sort of in high school being sort of a very straight-laced kid and not wanting to be in trouble. And I mean, and also, of course, college is the time when you're sort of exposed to ideas that are not those of your family and parents.
A little bit in high school, I think, you know, just because, you know, I was of that age, 17, 18, 17. Yeah, I'd be 18. Had begun to be exposed to more things, and like all the cultural things that we talked about earlier, the music and political changes and upheavals, social upheavals. But yeah, college was like, wow, this was a whole new world. And things would happen to you where you would really start to question the way you were brought up. Mm-hmm. And I can remember taking beginning drawing classes, and one of the things would be to talk about perception. Mm-hmm. And you start to just be introduced to ideas. Introduced to ideas that would make you think in other ways about things. I mean, just the idea of looking at negative space. I mean, you know, all of a sudden that became juxtaposition to things that you were experiencing in real life, and you start to think, well, what's the negative space with what's going on in my life? You know, what about those things? And of course, you would be exposed to drugs, you know, smoking weed, which in high school had just started. I mean, at the point when I was graduating from high school, I had friends that had smoked pot. And so, of course, you know, I was always willing to try those things. Before that, we'd just get drunk. But yeah, so I don't know.
Now, you were talking about the drawing class. I mean, to me, that feels interesting. I mean, in the way that, again, you were talking about sort of an idea of perception. I'm curious, it sounds like this program had a huge range of classes that you would take. Were there different classes that you felt like you, studio classes that you gravitated towards more than others?
Oh, yeah. Well, ceramics became pretty interesting for me because it was completely foreign to me. We'd never had much in the way of three-dimensional studies in high school. I mean, who does in high school? Because there's just no room to store stuff. Materials are messy, you know, so you don't see any of that stuff. But then when I was exposed to the beginning ceramics class, that was pretty neat. I mean, it was a plastic material. It was a mess. It was kind of fun. I mean, it was really engaging. And plus, the guy who was teaching the class, George Ferguson, was a really charismatic person, and he would treat us as grown up friends, you know, as adults. And so we would all go out and have coffee together. We'd go out to his house, and it became more of a lifestyle sort of thing than just taking a class. The painting instructors that I had, I was always a lousy painter. But the painting instructor that or instructors that I had were influenced by the beginnings of performance art. I was exposed to like Alan Capro, let's see, Zen poetry, which I can't think of who off the top of my head, though I did meet some of them. You would be more aware of the poets probably than I would. But there were some Zen poets, and I can remember, oh God, I can't remember the guy's name now, who was pretty famous, who came in and gave a lecture, and I ended up going out for coffee with him for a while. Geez, I wish I could remember the name.
That's totally okay. Now, just to back up a little bit and stay with ceramics just for a minute, what was the setup there like? What kind of facilities did they have?
They had, it was mostly wheel-thrown ceramics, though we did learn all the techniques. It was one large classroom, a kiln room, and a little clay mixing room off to the side. And that was about it. But there was just a lot of energy. And the studios were open at night, so we could go in and work. Supposedly you were supposed to be out of there by 11 o'clock, but yeah, that changed over a period of time. There was just a center of activity there. So painting, ceramics were pretty strong in terms of like charismatic activity going on through the faculty and through some of the students. There were students that were more advanced, that were like role models. And I actually ended up meeting some people there that went on and became pretty well known in the ceramic field. And anyway, it was energizing. You know, it was like, wow, you mean you can do this and make a living at this and actually, not work? Because it didn't seem like work. So yeah, that was pretty great.
Now, you were talking about the setup, for the most part, in terms of firing, pretty traditional gas fire.
Gas fire.
Okay.
High fire, stoneware reduction.
And then you were saying that the professor, Jim?
No, this was George Ferguson was the ceramics professor. Ferg.
Super charismatic in terms of connections with the students. What about the teaching? How did the teaching feel to you? And because I think for me, I am super shaped by those early teachers, in terms of thinking about my own teaching practice, and then also just kind of the way I think about everything else.
It's kind of funny in a way, because I don't remember George Ferguson. I don't remember Ferg ever teaching. I mean, he created the environment that we were in, and we just all fed off of each other's energy. I mean, it was like as much the place to be in the studio as anything else. Now, yeah, I know he taught. He did teach, but he just kind of let us go and encouraged us to do it. He never gave us that much feedback. I can even remember my first semester going into the critique and sort of being excited, and he was tired. He basically said, "Well, you look like you're doing great. I'm ready to go home. We'll talk later." And, oh, okay. And I don't know that we ever did talk later, but it was just enough to be caught up in that sort of energy. Now, in the other classes, painting, the painting instructor was a guy named Jim Vriedervoog, who's still alive. He lives in Florida. And Jim was into dialogue, so we talked a lot. And as I said, we were exposed to performance art. So I wasn't a great painter, but it didn't much matter, because we would do performances. We would do script things and go outside on campus and act stupid, and that was our painting.
Now, I'm interested because now, of course, we just go to YouTube and look up,
Yeah.
Vito Acconci's performance. But what about in terms of, I'm interested in how it was framed for you as a young person, and then also what materials were available to you in terms of understanding what it might look like, or what it might feel like, or what kind of reference you were given as a young person? Because I can imagine it would just be like, well, what is this supposed to be?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of, I can remember there would be a lot of students in my class when we would start talking about, or, they would start talking about performance art or interactive things, objects that were interactive, that it didn't fit in with their idea of what art was. And there would be pushback. But of course, we were always cool, so we thought it was great. I'm saying we with, air quotes on it. Being the in crowd and the with it kids, that the more conservative kids would have this pushback. But we were shown slides. I suppose there were some film clips, but I don't remember too many of those. We were given access to literature, the Alan Capro Performance Happening book. There was a big book that he did at one time. And actually, Capro came to give a lecture at a college nearby, and we all went to see him. Met him. It was great. Little short guy. So the way that was introduced was the idea of like, okay, well, think of a normal painting. You've got brush strokes, you've got objects that you make, and you place them on a canvas. All right, we'll take that into the real world, and let's assume that instead of using, a painted bottle, you've got a real bottle there. Mm-hmm. How would you move it around? What becomes the parameters? What becomes the framework of a painting? Mm-hmm. What becomes the framework of your perception? And so it was introduced to us that you just have to take what the traditional elements of art are and change how you view them in the real world. Mm-hmm. And so that made sense to a lot of us, but obviously some still didn't. They just still wanted to paint a bottle.
Right.
Which was not necessarily frowned on. But it was thought, well, I guess you're just not ready for this yet. Mm-hmm. That kind of sort of attitude.
To me, that feels really interesting too. Again, mm-hmm. this thing about how when you were in high school, you were sort of this, straight kid, mm-hmm. totally by the book, and then you get to school, and it sounds like there's some pretty radical, not upheavals, but some pretty radical thinking that's going on. What about in the art history program?
Ooh. I didn't like art history. I really didn't like. There were a couple art historians there who were very nice people and were enjoyable people, and socially I liked them and was involved with them. But my exposure to art history was, oh God, you just got to memorize a bunch of slides. It's like, this is really fucking boring. And so I never had a real good art history experience. Mm-hmm. It seemed like work. And the only really relevant thing for me was when I got into ceramics and began to see a history of ceramics. Because that was a point of reference. And it was completely new to me. I'd never been exposed to any kind of historical ceramic materials. So I was drawn to that. I knew enough art history to kind of get through. Mm-hmm. And that's basically all I did. Mm-hmm. Other people, I think, took advantage of that more than I did, absolutely more than I did. It wasn't a fault of the historians. I think they were generally sympathetic to the way that the painting was being taught. They understood, the conceptual approach to these things, but it kind of washed over me.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you were getting a ton of contemporary art history through those other classes, and then also sort of being connected to those people in that particular time. Now, what about you were talking about the ceramics classes clicking for you. Were you still sort of trotting along on the art education trail?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've followed that art education path. As I said, we didn't have a whole lot of alternatives in terms of electives, so it wasn't that I could pick out too many other classes. Poetry, I did take a couple semesters of poetry because I really liked the instructor. And we dealt with conceptual sort of poetic things too. He was involved with the art department, faculty and students in a lot of ways. So I did have that involvement. But the general educational path was to be an art teacher. And I followed that all the way up to my senior year. I actually even went to an interview, did my student teaching my senior year, and I had actually applied to a teaching job in Camden, New Jersey, which they offered me a job, but I had decided in the interim that I was going to go to graduate school, and then I got accepted in graduate school. Fortunately, I didn't go to Camden because I think they had major student riots and race riots in Camden that year, and there were teachers that were killed. So it was not a good thing. But I believed that I was going to be an art teacher.
No, and so you went ahead and went all the way to that point. And so your undergraduate degree is in art education?
Yes.
Okay. Now, thinking about the ceramics room and then also thinking about your time there, at some point you decided that you wanted to go to grad school for ceramics.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it was about ceramics that pulled you more than some of the other options? Because it sounded like you had a million options there at that school.
I was good at it. I mean, what beats success? I mean, if you're good at something, you're going to do it.
Now, and when you say you were good at it, tell me what you're thinking about in terms of being good at it.
Well, I evidently I was pretty focused. I mean, I could sit down. I was working in the studio by the time I started my junior year. I was working in the ceramic studio. Even if I wasn't taking a class, it was cool with the instructor because he encouraged people that wanted to work. Mm. So I was probably spending 10 hours a day and still trying to take like 18 credit hours in other courses. And I'm sure it hurt my GPA. But, I didn't care at that point. I was really just doing this because it felt good to do it. And I got better at it. I could throw. I was one of the better throwers. So that gave me this real sense of accomplishment. I don't think that I necessarily made better work, but technically I could do things better. And success begets success. If you work at something long enough, you get better at it. Mm-hmm. And so it was just like this positive reinforcement,
Now, what kind of things were you making?
Pots, just, traditional pots for the most part. However, I began, as I was going through the program, I started to be strongly influenced by, the West Coast pop art, Arneson would be one, the Volkos, all those old hairy heroes of West Coast art. David Gilhooly, there were a lot of like new and radical things coming out of the West Coast. So yeah, I began to be influenced by them.
Now, thinking about the ceramics and then seeing things that are farther away, how are you seeing those? Are you seeing those through magazines, through slides, books? How does that information come to you?
Magazines and slides, probably.
Okay. And this is all through Ferg?
Yeah, I think most of it probably emanated from him. Now, as you know, you move through the art program, of course, you begin to be exposed to other people. Mm-hmm. And as I said, there were some like students that were further ahead in the program than I was. Mm. And they went on to graduate school, and of course, then they would come back and we would talk, or you know, so I would gain exposure to those ideas and those people, and I could look them up in books or magazines. At the end of I'm trying to remember when it was, and the summer of my junior year, I think I went to Alfred University for a summer school. And I did that because anybody went to Alfred, you know, at that point. I say that, you know, ironically, but it was kind of true. Alfred was the big ceramics school on the East Coast. And even the West Coast people had been to Alfred. It's like, you know, but I went there for summer school, and it was it wasn't that I went there because I had any special skills. It was because they would take anybody in the summer school. So if you were...
Now, how did you hear about it? I mean, through the grad students who would come back?
Through the graduate students, through Ferg, you know. Okay. Alfred was Mecca.
Sure.
You know, so... And it was about 2 or 3 hour drive up in central New York State, right. South central New York State. And so it was about a 3 hour drive, say, from Edinboro. And so I went there for summer school, and it was great. I mean, that was like being in heaven, because the studio was open 6 days a week. They did close it down on Saturday. But it was open 6 days a week, and we could stay as long as we wanted to. I had no other obligations. And man, it was like a 5-week summer school. And when you got out of that, the next year, it was like, man, all of a sudden your skills just grew exponentially. I mean, it was just that concentrated amount of time doing nothing but that for 5 weeks. Within about 2 months later, all of a sudden, wow, I'm really good now. You know, it was, you know, in my own mind. But yeah, it was amazing how much that kind of work ethic changed you. And I think that's probably true of everybody. All of a sudden, when you have nothing else to do and you're that focused, you're going to grow. So that was a real change. And that was when I sort of began to think, I don't know if I want to be an art teacher anymore. I think I want to do this.
Now, what was the cohort? What was the environment like there at Alfred? I mean, was it other high school kids? Was it a whole bunch of people?
Oh, it was a whole bunch of people. There were like old people, young people. There were people from Canada. There were a bunch of, oh man, yeah, it was like a whole bunch of different people. And some of them I actually kept in touch with sporadically over the years, and they've gone on to become professionals. Some haven't. But yeah, you know, it was just, I think they basically accepted everybody who applied until they reached their maximum amount, and that was the cutoff, which was the kind of nice, you know, what would you call it, egalitarian environment where they didn't decide who got in and who didn't get for summer school. Mm. Now, graduate school was another matter. That was competitive. But summer school, they took anybody.
Now, what about the faculty?
The faculty, who cared? I mean, they, it wasn't, Dan Rhodes taught the summer that I was there. And Dan was this very reserved faculty member. He looked like a Richard Burton kind of gone to seed. He was very handsome with his shock of silver hair and very, craggy features. He had written textbooks, and they were basically the textbooks in ceramics at that time. Dan Rhodes was the man. But he sort of really, he would come in, he was very awe-inspiring in a way, because you just kind of expected him to drop these pearls of wisdom on you all the time, and I don't know that he really did, but he gave that air of it. Mm. And he basically would only come in and do critiques every couple of days. Mm. He would say a few profound things, and then he was gone. And the rest of the time, we'd just get back to work, just making stuff. And the only thing I can remember that was funny was that I think it was one of the last critiques, and there were some couple guys that were in that group class with me, and they were like art teachers from Pittsburgh. I don't know what they were doing there. But they weren't as in awe of Dan Rhodes as I was, and they made this bottle on the wheel. They threw a bottle, and it was very perfectly formed. It was beautiful, except they threw it solid. It was solid clay, and they put it out for the critique. And Dan Rhodes started talking about form and all this thing, and then he came to the bottle and he was expounding on what a beautiful form this was and this and that. And he went to pick it up, and it was so heavy he couldn't pick it up. And you could just see this kind of crack in the vernier because he actually started laughing. It was funny. It was the first human thing I'd seen him do. But he was the only teacher that summer. Now, other summers they had other outside faculty that would come in. Some of them were pretty great people. But
now, when you were talking about when you got done with that 5-week program and you went back to Edinboro, you just kind of felt like this. You had this.
Yeah. It was epiphany.
Yeah, an epiphany. And so, what was that senior year like in terms of? Because I would imagine a part of your time is not only learning the craft of the throwing, but also dealing with all of the other technical aspects that sort of come with ceramics. Was that something that sort of came naturally to you?
Well, I mean, it was a natural evolution. I don't know that it came naturally to me in particular. It was just, I was evolving, and I was making my own work. I wasn't taking assignments or anything. I basically just worked. Excuse me. And I was supported by the faculty. I could do what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So, it just got better, and then I started applying to graduate schools. Applied to Alfred, applied to University of Michigan. I think I applied to Cranbrook, which was a fantasy. That might have been the only schools that I applied. And I got accepted at Alfred, so I didn't even care about anybody else.
Mm. And so you just went straight through?
I took a year off.
Okay. What did you do in that year?
Hung out, smoked a lot of dope. Hung out and smoked a lot of dope, took drugs, lived near the campus, made an arrangement with the faculty that I would be allowed to come in and work, and I would do things for them. So I would clean up the studio, or I would take care of things. I would do firings for them, stuff like that. It was like a mutual thing, and I had a place to live in the basement of an Episcopal church, and basically did that for a year.
Wow.
and then went to graduate school afterwards.
And so you still had access to the facilities there at Edinboro?
Yeah.
Wow. That's really great.
Yeah, it was very supportive.
Now, when you were doing that, what did you notice that there was a difference in terms of the kinds of things that you were making? Like you were saying, you didn't have any assignments, you were just sort of given free rein.
It became more sculptural. Yeah, more sculptural, more experimental. And, those were the things those were probably the images of the work that I applied to graduate school with. So I was actually accepted more on the basis of that work than I was of like the traditional throne pieces.
Now, if you were to, we're stuck here in this land of audio only, and so if you were to describe the kinds of things that you were making, like if I were to say, like, Niles, what kind of pots were you making? How would you describe them?
Oh, pretty funky, in your face sort of things, crazy little landscapes with palm trees on them, and sometimes using molded ceramic objects that would be fired into the work. Largely sculptural work. Some of it was still marginally utilitarian. They were like sculptures that you could probably still use to hold flowers or fruit or something in. But yeah, much more experimental.
And then just in terms of thinking about things that motivate you to work, was there any, or maybe what the work does or what it means or all that kind of thing, do you think obviously the time has to be a part of that, you being present in the 1960s and working in the 1960s. I wonder, how do you think about that affecting your practice at the time?
Oh, I was a child of my time. I mean, yeah, I was heavily influenced by, the contemporary drug culture, crazy musicians, John Lennon, the Beatles had broken up, whatever. Frank Zappa actually came to a concert. I saw Frank Zappa. Was that kind of like twisting the way you view the accepted and trying to come up with reinterpreting images or thoughts as they would be traditionally presented. So those were the things that I think were shaping my influence. I had a college roommate, actually, who I've been in touch with recently, who went whole hog into just performance art. Eventually got a job in public television and did independent filmmaking for years, and has retired from that, and he just went back and started doing performance art again. It was fresh at one time, but now he's rediscovering it, and it's not fresh right now, so he needs to work through that. But that's another issue. But yeah, I don't know.
That sounds good. I mean, that was a great description. I mean, one of the things that I notice about you is like you'll start to talk, and then there's a part of my brain that's like, okay, ask him what kind, or what other thing. But you just do it. You just go right through. It's been really great. Thanks, Niles.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're making that transition from Edinboro to Alfred after your year away.
Right.
What's that transition like?
Transition first year was very good. I was happy. I mean, I had studio space. I was working around a lot of other people that were committed. Alfred, the structure of Alfred was that they had, in the graduate ceramics program, there were 10 people in the first year grads and 10 people in the second year grads. So it was a 2-year program. So there were 20 graduate students at any one time. So I was, and there were a couple visiting faculty member at that point too. So it wasn't just the regular graduate faculty. That transition went pretty well, with the exception that towards the end of the year, I was really beginning to get burned out a little bit. And we had to, this was a dark part of my development, I think, and just shows what a real asshole I was, and probably still am, but, we had to take a kiln building class. And God, I've never been good at doing things that I don't want to do. And it's just, sometimes you build up these little barriers in your mind and you think, okay, I just have to get through this, but nah. So we had to take this kiln building class, and it was taught by one of the ceramic engineers. There's a ceramic engineering program at Alfred, which is pretty world-renowned. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But God, these guys were just boring as dirt. And because they would come in and start talking about, these mathematical equations and how to build these structures and for your kilns, and man, I could just feel myself going dead inside. And actually, it was a required course. We had to take it, but I think about 3/4 of the way through the semester, there was this one class where I just went completely blank, and I stood up, stacked my books on my desk, took them over to a windowsill, pulled up the window, and the guy's giving a lecture this whole time. And I threw open the window, threw my books out, and jumped out the window. Fortunately, it was on the first floor, so it wasn't like, but I landed a bunch of bushes. And I didn't go back. And I asked my classmates when they got out of class, well, what did he do? And they said, well, he just kept talking. But so needless to say, I failed that class. And you weren't allowed to fail a class. So I was pretty much told that you need to pass this class before you can continue on in the program. And I was pretty damn lucky that they didn't toss me out of the whole program, because I certainly should have been at that point. But I did. I took it as an independent study in the summer, and I built a little kiln and got through the class. But yeah, it was, and that sums up a lot of that's me. It's not something that I'm proud about, but there are certain points where I just say, oh, screw this shit.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the things, I get you. I mean, there is definitely something that's inherently wrong about the semester length, pressure. But I'm interested. I mean, when you go from undergrad to grad school, especially when you go from a regular human being school to this, like you were saying, this well-known school, Alfred. I mean, to me, it seems like it would be this thing where you suddenly find yourself in a space with everybody else who is just bananas about ceramics and all things ceramics. I mean, that must have been, that I would imagine that would be both exciting and also sort of daunting, in that you would also be around a lot of people who were just stunning and brilliant in terms of what they were doing. What was being at Alfred like? Because, that's such a huge, specific thing, especially in the land of ceramics.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. There was a certain amount of competition, certainly. I mean, you would tend to see what other people were doing, and you would kind of rank yourself in a way that was impossible. But on the other hand, you know, everybody was pretty supportive of each other. I mean, there were a few people that you could see that maybe they weren't quite as committed as you felt like you were, or other, but generally that was not a problem. And most of us were just working. I mean, we were just working in our studios. It wasn't like we were looking over our shoulder at the other guy that much. And at Alfred, Alfred is in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York. There is absolutely nothing around. It was even more isolated than Edinboro was. And so we would largely work all day in the studio and then go up to the campus pub and drink all night. And then get up 10 o'clock or whatever the next morning and do it all again. And that's the way it was. You fed off of the other people who were there more than you were the faculty, with the faculty. And so when you were asking about teachers at Alfred, I mean, there were some great ones, and they became more important to me later on in life. Robert Turner, who was just an amazing person, had taught at Black Mountain College in the early days, you know, who was there? Rauschenberg, just a whole raft of people. Val Cushing, who was just an amazing person, an incredible traditional pot maker. Dan Rhodes was still there. Who else? Anyway, Ted Randall was the chairman of the department. Ted Randall was pretty funny. He was more of an analytical, almost engineering kind of person, but was interesting in his own right. But they didn't really teach. I mean, it was sort of like I was talking about earlier with my undergraduate experience. They just kind of let you go, and you didn't have much responsibility. I mean, you had your assistantship, whatever you had to do for your assistantship, and you had to work, and that was about it. And at the end, you know, you sort of put up your show, and everybody applauded, and you graduated and move on. That was it. But it was an intense experience. It was great.
And mostly intense because of your cohorts.
Pretty much, yeah. You fed off of each other, I think, as much as anything else.
Now, I'm curious, in terms of thinking about your cohorts, were there some that were more important than others, and if so, who?
Well, there were ones that I was closer to and that I was, you know, friendly with and that would share more things with. Probably the ones I was closest to are not ones that, I mean, I don't think they became household names or anything. There were a couple people that worked there that did go on and become recognized artists. Christine Frederici comes to mind, who was a student there at that time, and a few others. But
and what do you think it was about Christina's personality, work, energy that pushed you?
Well, I don't know. We were not that close.
Oh, okay.
She was not a close friend of mine, but she was there, and I was aware of her work. Her work changed dramatically when she got out of school. When she graduated, she taught in University of Florida, maybe. She was near Miami, but her work changed dramatically, and she got a lot of recognition. But most of the people that I went to school with then followed a path where they got teaching jobs of one sort or another in universities. There were a couple of them that went directly into their own pottery studios and made their living off of their pottery. So that was.
Now, thinking about your work, making that transition to grad school, Alfred's a 2-year program?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you make that transition, you're there at Alfred. How would you say your work changed?
Changed a lot. Technically got better, technically got more experimental, because, like Alfred was a playground in terms of like equipment and materials. And like I said, we had ceramic engineers there. So, if you ran into technical problems, gosh, it was like living around an encyclopedia. Somebody could come up with an answer. When I went back for my second year of graduate school, I was determined that I was going to make the exact opposite of anything that contained space. Because mostly people would think ceramics, you think of pottery, you think of containers, you think of vessels. And actually, I had a faculty member at Edinboro tell me when he heard I was accepted at Alfred, he said, "Well, I guess you're going to make pots for the rest of your life." So, what an asshole. But the second year, I decided I'm not making anything that contains volume.
Where'd that come from? Was it just sort of arbitrary, or just sort of?
Yeah, it's like everything else in my life. It's probably arbitrary. No, you just think about what am I? I spend all this time. What am I making? What am I doing? And you realize, to a large extent, you're making vessels. You've got mass. You've got volume. And I sort of began to think, trying to think outside the box with that conceptual attitude that I'd been exposed to. What would that not be? What would be the opposite of that? And so I came up with this idea that I'm just going to leave volume and mass out of it. So I started making pieces of paper out of ceramics. And it was kind of interesting at first. Basically, I was pouring clay slip out on pieces of paper and then firing them. And essentially, it was this kind of reinventing of the process for me. I took advantage of having engineers around because I kept asking them, well, what can I put in my clay that'll make it ultra thin, ultra light, but it won't break? So we talked about adding fibers, adding chemical clay extenders, and I ended up with these formulas that I would make these clay bodies, and I was making like 20 by 30 sheets of clay that were, I don't know, probably an 1/18 of an inch thick. They were real fragile, but they would hold together. And to the largest extent, I was making just flat sheets of paper, blank. I didn't put anything on them. I didn't glaze them. I would pick them up and I would mount them in different ways so that they would hang on the wall. The next step was to try to take that flat plane and try to make it stand up, which led me into doing origami. So I was making origami pieces out of this. Interestingly enough, and I wasn't really aware of it at this time, Linda Bengelis was doing all these sculptures, based on origami and cast things. I wish I would have seen them, early on, but I didn't see them until much later. But I was doing that sort of thing on a small scale. It wasn't anything to this, of importance the way hers was, but that was a big breakthrough for me. It was like a major influence in my work. And my whole thesis exhibition was these finely cast porcelain sheets of paper.
Now, you were saying while you were doing this, Linda Binkless was doing that. It sounds like a lot of the things that you're looking at, or a lot of the things that you're exposed to, are there at Alfred, your cohorts. What about the wider world? Were you also exposed to other things that were going on in the world through your instructors or through your cohort?
Well, I mean, yeah, we were aware of certainly things in the ceramic world. And I think to the larger extent that we realized that ceramics was just a small part of the art world. I mean, like a much less respected or inhabited part of the art world, but, there it was. We're aware of a lot of the things that were going on, either through magazines, looking at Art Forum, images that we would see in class, seeing exhibitions. We were exposed to a lot. Alfred was in a neat place in the sense that we were close enough to New York City, but certainly remote. So most of the students at Alfred, undergraduate students, were from New York City. They were pretty interesting. They were like city kids that were suddenly exposed to this country environment, and they were like crazy, running around naked and long hair and partied, and that's a whole other story. There's a lot of crazy stuff that went on up there.
Now, was there a lot of overlap between undergrads and grads? Like I remember.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a lot of interaction. I mean, the graduates had their own studios in a separate part. We were down there. We were that isolated, I guess, in a little bit of a way. But we would interact with undergraduates all the time. And of course, when you went up to the bar at night, you were all drinking together. You were all partying together. Alfred's a small town. There's nothing else to do. So you hang out and party with your friends, and you work in the studio. We were exposed to, there was a film series that they had. They had a filmmaking class up there, and they would show experimental films all the time. I remember seeing Robert Downey Sr. came in for a lecture, and that was pretty nice. It was pretty interesting. As a film director, he was pretty off the wall at the time. And we were exposed to a lot of experimental films. Visiting artists would come in all the time. Some people you would expect, some people not. Even the choices of musicians and people that would come into town was pretty amazing for a small school in the middle of nowhere. Remember we had a concert with Hot Tuna came in and played. It was great.
But what about some of those visiting artists? I mean, I would imagine that Alfred would have, especially then, like a heavy rotation of people who would come through.
It was pretty good. I'm trying to think. See, you got to remember, you're talking to an old person here, and my memory just is like porous.
These interviews are like little pop quizzes. Where I'm just
right.
like, okay, now, what
I'm going to fail this.
What about this person?
There were lots of people that came in and would give lectures, and we would see them and talk to them. And being a graduate student, you would have a little more access to them. Can I come up with all their names off the top of my head? Probably not. But yeah, there was a lot of exposure.
Now, I'm curious too about, I know a lot of times at schools, sometimes you'll have teachers who are like superstars and not particularly good teachers. And then sometimes you'll have teachers who are good makers, but they're fantastic teachers. And so I'm curious about your time at Alfred. I know you were saying that really it was from your cohort, but I'm curious about some of the people who were there in the teaching capacity. And then I'm interested to hear a little bit about those experiences.
Honestly, I don't think any of the people that taught really affected me that much. I mean, you were aware of them and you respected them and you saw their work, but that didn't necessarily affect that much what you did. I have the highest respect for people like Bob Turner and Val Cushing and Dan Rhodes and all of those people. Wayne Higby was teaching there the last year that I was there, but I don't remember any of them actually teaching or dropping any great pearls of wisdom on me. They were people that I was around, and I was aware of their work, and they were aware of my work, and but I don't even remember really that many critiques. Honestly.
Because what was the setup there? I mean, it was like, because all grad schools are kind of different. What was the setup in terms of the expectations of your classwork? I mean, aside from this jumping out the window thing.
It was just make. I mean, there was not really much more that I can say about it. It was kind of hands off.
Yeah.
It was like, here it is, do it.
Because, I mean, one of the reasons I ask, of course, is I'm just sort of curious about how those other experiences, because my grad school experience and the one that we have at the University of Memphis that I'm a part of, it's one way. But, of course, the world is massive. And then especially thinking about Alfred, especially that time we're in the early 70s now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So especially in the early 70s, I mean, that's such a pivotal part of their history. I mean, it's such a long history program.
Yeah.
But, you said when we were talking about them before, you were saying that during the time when you were with them, it wasn't particularly, however you phrased it, but then you said later, it was really important. Later, after when you finished school, you were saying that some of those relationships were particularly important.
Well, yeah, they became more significant to me, I think, after I graduated. Honestly, Alfred basically would just say, there's the studio, work, don't work, do whatever you want to do, and we'll deal with it. Now, everybody worked. I mean, I can't say that maybe everybody worked equally, but everybody worked, and I don't think that there was any problem with it. They would encourage you. They would direct you if you asked them questions. But there wasn't any really kind of pressure. It was just like, it's an open environment. I was actually kind of shocked when I finally got into a teaching position. I first taught for 2 years at State University in New York at Albany. And then came down to Memphis and began teaching here. I mean, it would always strike me when we would have critiques with graduate students and people would start talking about, they would give criticism to graduate students. And hell, that was a whole new world to me. I didn't even know how to do that. How do you criticize it? I mean, I think I became more involved in it later, and which I have mixed feelings about. I mean, I'm right now at this point where I don't know that any dialogue is good, bad, or other. I think it's just it is or it isn't, and largely you just stay out of people's way and let them do what they're going to do. I wish I would have felt that way more often. I don't think I ever criticized anybody and told them something that was blatantly untrue, but it probably wasn't right. I think I told truth as I knew it at that particular time, but I probably should have just shut up and let them do what they were going to do. Anyway, all I'm saying is I didn't have that experience. I didn't have much art history, and I didn't have much critical examination. Basically, we just did what we wanted to do. And I think for the most part it worked out. It certainly worked out for me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, pros, cons, both sides. Now, when you were talking about becoming closer to them or more influential later
Mm-hmm.
on, I'm curious what form that takes.
It came about through seeing them later on in professional environments, conferences, workshops, couple times writing letters back and forth. I realized, how interesting and enigmatic these people were. Alfred, for those, for you or for anybody who doesn't know, the people that I've been talking about are, Val Cushing and Robert Turner, primarily. And there was a photography teacher at Alfred, John Wood, and these guys were like Zen masters. They really were. They were just these humble, amazingly perceptive people, genuinely supportive and kind. They were incredibly kind people. And I kind of knew that at the time I was there, but I realized later on how much they were. And so my respect for them grew tremendously. Sometimes I would ask for letters of support if I was applying for grants or if I was applying for a job teaching or something someplace. And they were gracious. But generally it was just, as a personal interaction with them through other manners, certainly not through educational channels. Later on.
All those people that you mentioned are like, in the way that we say Bill Eggleston, those are the people that we say that about in ceramics. I think almost all of the, especially Cushing, is such a household, not a household name, but if you've ever taken a ceramics class, you know who this person is.
Right.
And so, and then for me, I'm also curious about, what they were like as people, and I appreciate you filling in those blanks in terms of talking about that, because I think that's such an important part too in the shaping of a program, in the way that if it's a large enough program, people can sort of be themselves. You don't have to be all things to all people. And I think for a program, especially as diverse and as big as Alfred's, and I would imagine that each of the instructors was able to sort of be themselves, and to do the things that they do really well and bring that to the table. I appreciate you filling that in, especially with those guys. That's good.
Oh yeah, they were just some of the nicest people that I can imagine.
Right. Yeah. At any time I mention Mark Doty on any of the social medias, and I'm like, oh, I read this Mark Doty thing, every time someone will pipe up and say, he is the sweetest guy. He is the nicest guy. And to me, that's interesting, thinking about especially those big figures in the history of ceramics, especially.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And that's also kind of one of those programs that's so storied and it's been around for so long, and so I appreciate you filling us in on some of that. That was really good. What so you make that hang on, we're about the 15-minute mark, or 15 minutes to go. How you doing?
I'm fine.
We can pause anytime.
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Now, thinking about that time afterwards, so you decide that teaching is a good move. You were saying some of your friends from Alfred went on to be full-on potters, and then a bunch of your cohorts were also becoming teachers. And how did you feel like that was something that you would want to do?
Well, it just seemed like a natural progression at that time. I wasn't focused on making pottery per se at that point. Obviously, after spending a whole semester or a whole year making flat sheets of, of nothingness, the idea of being a self-sustaining potter was not really in the cards. So getting a teaching job seemed like the only real natural progression for me. And interestingly, as the year went on, I did not get a teaching job. I was in the running for a couple, but somebody else was hired. So at the end of my time at Alfred, I went to Philadelphia. I had my close friend, Edward Eberly, was teaching at Philadelphia College of Art. And Ed said, well, why don't you come down, you can teach summer school here. And so I went down there to teach summer school. And that was a great experience. Because I got to spend a lot of time with Ed, who just died actually about a year and a half ago. Just an amazing artist, and somebody who did go on and work entirely out of his studio. And he did become pretty well known, but one of the most honest people that I know, who made work that was genuinely beautiful, but not with any sort of contrived sense of it. It was just basically an expression of him, where the things he made were just so natural and him that it came across in the work. Anyway, and that's another subject. If you want to talk about that, that's fine. But he invited me down, taught summer school, and towards the end of my session there in Philadelphia, I got a call from Alfred, and I can't remember who called me. It might have been Val. May well have been Val. Called me and said, hey, there's a teaching job that's a one-year position at the University of New York at Albany. The teacher who teaches ceramics up there, her name was Fran Simkus. Fran is ill. She can't go on, cancer or something, I'm not sure. And would you be interested in this? And I said, yeah. And so he gave me the contact information. I got in touch with them. I got the job. So I taught for a year up there. That extended for a second year because it was obvious that she wasn't coming back. And so I taught 2 years at Albany, and that was good. And
hold up.
Yeah.
Teaching's good. What was it that clicked for you? Because there's no, if I remember right, at Alfred, the grad students have no teaching component. Is that right?
I was a teaching assistant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I had a teaching assistant in the foundation program.
Oh, okay. So you were teaching there as well. So you had taught college kids at that point.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then obviously you were okay with it enough to apply for this gig. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what was Albany like?
Albany was great. Small art department. Very plugged into the New York gallery. Richard Stankiewicz was the sculpture teacher who was extremely well known and historically connected. As far as sculpture, Dennis Bing taught plastics, and he was a big thing in New York gallery scene at that time too. Mark Greenberg, a painter you might be familiar with. Hyper-realistic, gorgeous images. You'd paint these big, 6-foot canvases with a brush that had about 3 hairs in it, just hyper-realistic. So I was exposed to a whole other level of fine arts there. And plus Albany was just like great. It was like state capital of New York. There was a lot of money. There was a cultural environment. I was close to, in the summertime, the New York City Ballet was up there. The opera was at nearby. Modern dance was at Jacob's Pillow, whatever. There was all kinds of, it was a great spot to be in. I really loved it. But that job disappeared.
Now,
They eliminated the ceramics program, partially because State University of New York was going broke at that point. And so they were cutting back all kinds of things. So
now you were talking about the city and all these great things that it had. What about the students? What was the teaching like there?
Teaching was good. I mean, students were very sophisticated, cosmopolitan, again, mostly from New York City. I remember one time I took a bunch of students out to experience a wood firing outside the city, and we were out there, and on the way back, it was dark, and they got really nervous because they had never been in dark. So how do you know where you're going? There are no street signs. So it's, it's a country, we know where we're going. But they'd always lived in cities, so it was pretty funny. But it was good. It was good. I liked the location.
And did teaching agree with your temperament?
I liked the teaching up to a certain point. It was always very clear to me that I just wanted to work in the studio and be left alone. Teaching was a means to an end. I don't think teaching was ever like second nature to me. It's always been kind of a forced thing. So.
Now, when you were talking about, one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about being there at Albany were the other faculty that were there as well. Was there a lot of cross conversation in terms of or a mentorship in terms of how this crazy thing teaching in college works?
To some extent. I mean, most of them, I think, still treated ceramics as sort of like a second rate. It's art with a small a. It was a craft. And the woman who had taught there before was, in all truthfulness, not a fine art person. She was more of a craft person. But that's okay. But I think they appreciated what I was doing. They appreciated that I was approaching it from a different standpoint. I did have a show in the gallery when I was up there, and I think that was a surprise to some of them. I ended up getting a summer workshop sort of thing out of it at Art Park, which was up near Niagara Falls, up in that area, and where I showed and demonstrated a completely non-functional ceramic. So, there were some nice, spin-offs from that. But the faculty were very nice, but they weren't, huggy, kissy. We were not all friends. It wasn't a big family. They were fairly supportive, but when it came down to it, there was no question. Well, ceramics is gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just to back up a little bit, one of the things that you talked about with Albany were the other arts that were present there. Like you were talking about how the New York City Ballet was up there. What is that something that was a part of, was on your radar before? Or was this something that because you were in Albany, you were exposed to?
Probably more because I was in Albany. I knew about ballet. I knew who Margot Fontaine was and Rudolf Nureyev. Well, I'd never seen them dance before.
Right.
So that was pretty neat. I had never been to an opera before. But the New York City Opera, summers up in Lake Placid, I think. Somewhere up there. So yeah, I was exposed to some different things. I'd been exposed to ballet before. I did. Are we running out of time?
That's the clicker. But finish your thought.
Oh, I had one of the things that I did do at Alfred one summer is I did a guest teaching at oh God, no, it's just got to escape me. A small independent school in Ohio. It's gone from my mind right now. Anyway, and they had a ballet troupe there from New York, and I spent time working with them, and that was pretty fun. So I was aware of these things. I'd just never been exposed to them in quite the same way. So Albany did that.
Nice. That's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Thank you, Niles. That was really, you did great. I think I asked fewer questions of you than I think I've asked of anybody yet in this thing. You were really great at
So I just can't shut up.
No. I mean, you're like really good at stringing the thoughts together, and then instead of me having to say, well, what was it about so-and-so that worked, you really were able to pull that through, and then you're also really great at the transitions. It was really great, Niles. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate it. And that was the first interview of 2 that I recorded with Niles Wallace. The interview that you just listened to was recorded on January 21st, 2025. Please join us next week when we will have the second of the 2 interviews. Until then, thank you for listening.